Without further ado,
you.
I would like to introduce the next speaker, Ms. Sarinajit Kaur. She leads the teacher leadership and the champions support for students with SEN in mainstream schools. As a master teacher, Sarina's area of work includes looking at the professional development of the educational fraternity. She enjoys growing professional excellence as well as promoting a culture of networked learning in the area of SEN among teachers. Prior to joining AST, Sarina served in 2 mainstream schools and was head of the department overseeing discipline, pupil management, and student development. Before her secondment to NIE, and as a teaching fellow at NIE, she worked closely with both pre-service and in-service teachers in the area of special needs, teaching and managing diverse learners, pedagogical practices, classroom and curriculum adaptations, and parent engagement. She's also a recipient of the NTU Excellence in Teaching Commendation Award in 2013 and 2015. Today, she'll be presenting to us, facilitating learning of students with special educational needs. We welcome Ms. Kaur.
Thanks, Winkin, for that very grand introduction. I hope it didn't raise your hopes too much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. So Ming Yi took you through SETT. I'm going to take you through space. All right, so in this keynote, we're going to look at suggestions and ideas in facilitating the learning of students with SEN within the classroom. My sharing today is a curation of experiences gathered from working with the fraternity through my work at AST and with SEND. So it's very heartwarming to see a very diverse and large group of participants today amidst your very, very busy schedules. Thank you for coming and thinking about SEN support. We know that SEN support leverages a many helping hands approach, and your presence today affirms the critical role that we all play in providing inclusive educational opportunities for all our students. So in this very short time together, I hope to provide you the opportunity to engage in reflective practice. You notice I'm speaking quite quickly because I have a lot to share in just 30 minutes. So I hope that you will engage in your own reflective practice as you contextualize this keynote to the roles that you are serving. So whether as school or branch heads, middle managers, teacher leaders, allied educators, I was looking at the participants list, it's a whole range, or even our classroom teachers here. Do think about the students, the teachers, the classrooms, the subjects, and the schools that you're supporting. I hope to provide you food for thought and questions for reflection as we learn, unlearn, relearn. So the student, primarily the other in the classroom, the one who challenges our assumptions and boundaries, is at the heart of my sharing today. So I surveyed teachers attending my workshops and other professional development sessions to understand facilitators and barriers in supporting the student with SEN within their mainstream classrooms. Recurring issues surrounded 2 key concerns. 1, having to teach the SEN student effectively within a class of 30 or 40 students. And the second, a desire to better support the student, but feeling this lack of know-how and inability to create perceived specialized resources. So a myth that surrounded these 2 key concerns that I've just mentioned was that all SEN students needed specialized support all the time to assess mainstream learning. This misinformation was very important because in my observations of classrooms and conversations with educators, I've noticed that if the educator felt he or she was not competent enough, the battle was easily lost. So for any change to occur, the most important factor is the you factor. You being the site of any educational change that will take place. So a key way around this for me was to spend time and give space for educators to examine their own beliefs, even before we could talk about how SEN support can be provided. And you would realize that that is exactly what I'm trying to do now at this keynote. I encourage you to think of your own beliefs about SEN support in your work. So what are the beliefs that we hold? Whether as an advocate, a facilitator, or leader in providing pedagogical support or intervention, the question I pose to you is, so what is your anchor? Why are you concerned about these students with SEN in the first place? So in speaking with teachers, it is clear that their beliefs drove their practices and guided their actions. So whatever the role we are assuming currently, the common factor is always the student at the heart of all that we do. And having this common factor facilitates SEN support. When we believe that every child wants to and can learn, we as educators are very motivated to facilitate the learning of each child in our care. So this common language, when articulated positively, was a facilitator to SEN support because it provided a guide and a driver. The next part that was significant in my conversations was the diversity within our heterogeneous classrooms. So the next question for your reflection is, so who is your learner? Who is this student you are most concerned about? Who is this learner who you would like to better support? Think about this person that you're so worried about. So if I were to ask you to share your individual responses, what we would have is a microcosm of the diversity in our classrooms, which is situated within the current educational landscape. This diverse classroom, which includes a range of learner profiles, including the student with SEN, is the reality educators face daily. Teachers have shared that a common language facilitates their work within the school. So the beliefs shared were relatively personal ones, or sometimes aligned to the school's core values. So if we are to facilitate learning better, educators need a common reference point. On a national front, we have the Singapore curriculum philosophy and the Singapore teaching practice, which we know are gifts that help us all sing the same song so that our students, not just some students or most students, but all our students are better supported as they progress from one level to the next and one school to the next. So teachers who are looking at STP as a means to better support students with SEN zoomed in on the teaching actions and considerations that are tagged as SEN friendly on the STP. Teachers also shared that as we provide access to all learners within our classrooms, positive classroom culture is the most important and best starting point. So if we delve deeper into positive classroom culture, what it does is guides us in the key areas that would actually help us ensure that the classroom is set up for effective learning. So using PCC from STP as a reference, I looked at what I was learning and observing against the 5 key areas of establishing interaction and rapport, maintaining positive classroom discipline, setting expectations and routines, building trust, and empowering learners. So what does positive classroom look like when unpacked for our learners? With this context and acknowledgement of the need for a common factor, a common language as a foundation for SEN support, I discussed what I was curating with senior teachers SEN serving in the secondary schools. I realized that there were recurring key points that they alluded to. So in the next few minutes, I will share voices from the ground shared by my STs, Robin, Pamela, Hezwani, Juliana, Frankie, and Xiao Yin, from Meridian Secondary, River Valley High, Crest Secondary, Burdock Green Secondary, and Assumption Pathway. I've given you a quick mention of their schools to provide you the context that they work in. So to help with recall and further reflection after today's session, I'm going to use the acronym SPACE. I will share SPACE within the frame of a positive classroom culture. So you may wish to use these two reflection questions to guide your learning. 1, what are you currently doing for SEN support? And 2, what would you like to improve or stop as you refine your practice? So let's begin with the S of SPACE, support. Most of you would be very familiar with the tiered system of support. The TSS is a framework to guide our thinking about how best to systematically support diverse students' needs using the available resources that you have in your school in order to improve learning for all students. Tier 1 provides solid foundation for our students with universal strategies that can benefit all students. So with quality instruction and effective delivery of core curriculum, we estimate that at least about 80% of our students will benefit. One practice that facilitates SEN support is the understanding that we do not peg the students to the tiers of support. Allow me to provide an example through the story of John. John has dyslexia, and he struggles with reading. His main challenge in his English lesson is in comprehension, where he will lift whole sentences in answering given questions. So as a teacher, I would bear John's needs in mind when I design, I plan, and enact my lesson. I will give very careful attention to the selection of sans serif fonts, a spacing of 1.5 with a font size of at least 12. I will use auditory means of instruction to match the written forms. I teach him chunking and visualization skills too. John will also receive Tier 2 remediation support through my remedial sessions, where he will get more practice using instructional materials aligned with what I have done in my classroom. John is also supported at Tier 3, where he receives more intensive targeted support by the allied educator, who uses texts from my lessons and teaches decoding skills. So the allied educator would also have regular chats with me as we together support John. So this is as compared to expecting John to progress just because he's being supported at Tier 3, and then leaving John to just do whatever he can manage at Tier 1. If we are going to just hope that pegging the child to a more intensive tier like 3 is going to see that progress, STs are sharing that it doesn't work that way. And we know that it doesn't work that way because for TSS to work, we do not peg the student to the tiers. Instead, John is receiving the needed support at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So STs have shared that this common understanding of how the tiers should work is important as we support our students in various subjects within our secondary schools. We need to provide the space to have conversations about how we are supporting, for example, students like John, what works, what does not. So in facilitating learning, teachers benefit when there is space to clarify and discuss school-wide approaches to SEN support. Let's have a look at the P, pedagogy. I wanted to name it practice, but I thought let's use pedagogy, a massive, commonly heard word. Well, what does it look like for effective SEN support? Providing SEN support in a mainstream school is not about intensive intervention. Teachers get very fearful that they may not be well equipped to support a student with SEN in their class of 30 or 40. So what has helped is inclusive pedagogy. Inclusive pedagogy reminds us that every member of our classroom has equal rights and must be given opportunities to the teaching and learning. It moves away from deterministic ideals of learning or of conveniently putting our students into compartments of what they can and cannot do. So it really helps us spotlight on the dignity of all students. So we go about teaching, as I mentioned, not just to some or most, but all students, so that all our students can learn. In my conversations, it was evident that teachers know how important including students is, but the big question was how? How do I even do this thing you call inclusive pedagogy? So this is one example as we think about the how of inclusive pedagogy. Many teachers find this an effective way to facilitate learning. This is a visible lesson agenda, which was shared during a 45-minute food studies lesson. The teacher listed the parts of the lesson and numbered them as shown on this slide with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. As she progressed through the parts, she actually ticked off against the number. Having an agenda such as this helps all students to see where the teacher is currently in that lesson. It is useful in getting students on task and engaged with the day's lesson. So in this class, there were many students with challenges. Though it was done with the students with SEN in mind, it is written visibly on the right-hand side of the whiteboard at the beginning of the lesson and left there for reference throughout the lesson. This is something I think our allied educators are very familiar with. So this is as opposed to the ones we may have on our PowerPoint slides that disappears as we progress through the lesson. I'm sure many of you here have a similar experience or similar practice in your classrooms. What is critical is the clarity in the purpose and the consistency in the process. So the visible lesson agenda is an idea that has been found to be effective for students across primary, secondary, and college settings. So I noticed that we do have some of our primary school friends here as well as college colleagues as well. So what makes this even more effective is when done by every teacher coming into the classroom. If there's just one idea you would like to try, do try this. As you reflect on this idea or any other idea for SEN support, I encourage you to think about the needs of the learners you have in mind. For a student with autism, who may need the structure and predictability, but may not cope with sudden changes, I may leave out the time allocation as seen in the brackets on this slide. This provides that needed flexibility should the video, for example, overrun or take shorter than expected. So what we are essentially doing is we are removing the barriers to learning as shown in the third image of this slide. The wooden fence that blocked the view of the boys watching the baseball match is removed so that each one has access to watch the game. Instead of segregating or excluding, we include all by removing the barriers that impede access to learning. So for the example of the visible lesson agenda, we are helping clear the distractions to learning. By clearing this white noise, we allow students the opportunity to assess the learning and, for example, know where we are in our lesson, and to quickly come back should they space out. When I spoke to a student with attention and hyperactivity issues, he said that the lesson agenda helps him because he knows where the teacher is, and he knows that the teacher is already at point 4 out of 5, and he will soon be allowed his movement break. So it helped him self-regulate and work towards a goal. So we remove the barriers and not lower the bar when we provide support to our students based on their diverse learner profiles. Here is a visual to just seal pedagogy, inclusive pedagogy. Strategies that help the student with SEN benefits all other students. So you don't need an additional bag of tricks. We say that when we shovel the ramp for the wheelchair user, we are allowing access to the rest. SEN support is not about singling students out for isolated treatment. It should not be an afterthought of lesson design. We think about the student right from the onset of our plans, our designs, our enactment of lessons, and our support. Thirdly, acceptance. Allow me to provide ideas through May's story. May is a student who has struggled with dyslexia. As a teenager, she has already learned coping strategies and is able to string sentences together better. But at the teenage years, it is not just about stringing sentences together and trying to overcome challenges with literacy independently. In the words of one of the STs, having to jump these additional hurdles becomes more challenging when there is a lack of acceptance that students like me need time and space to be able to perform as expected. Teachers can sometimes place immense pressure on students to level up when they may not be ready or may not be able to. So imagine the scenario of a humanities lesson, and May is called on to read a paragraph detailing the signing of a treaty. May stands up, freezes on seeing several unfamiliar words, notices her peers staring at her, and she bolts out of the classroom. She stays in the toilet for the rest of the lesson and refuses to return as she feels embarrassed and knows she will be questioned and teased. If there was acceptance that we differ and have varied strengths, if there was a strong culture of support, the scenario may be different. A positive classroom culture of acceptance provides our students a buffer as there is understanding from teachers and peers. It helps mend cracks. It helps manage lesson stresses. Sadly, May develop anxiety along with her dyslexia due to repeated stresses. So here is advice from the parent of a child with a similar experience as me. As educators, it helps in SEN support if we acknowledge that these secondary school students are at the age where the gap between them and their peers becomes glaringly wide, where they may have been blissfully ignorant when younger. It hits them hard that they do not seem to fit in. This struggle with why am I different is real and painful. Teachers may benefit from accepting that every student is different and has different strengths from one another. What is useful if we as educators think deeper about how we encourage acceptance within our classrooms? So how do we actually do this? Questions for your reflection. Are we aware of the needs and challenges of our students as well as their strengths? Can we provide more opportunities for these students to showcase their strengths and downplay their challenges by allowing alternative means of presentations, for example? The reading of that paragraph by me could have been done in alternative ways, or maybe by someone else. And the result of that disruption in the classroom could have been minimized or totally prevented. How do we as educators show acceptance and celebrate the diversity of these students so that we can make learning possible for them? As we thought deeper about the many things we do to set routines, empower learners through a trusting learning environment, community featured strongly in our discussions. With the reference of the 6 key principles in SEN support wisdom, I will focus on the O of wisdom: organize a community around the child. This can look very different across schools. What does this mean, and what does this look like in your classroom? STs shared that unpacking the principles of wisdom is essential, so everyone has the same understanding and awareness as we support the student with SEN. Open discussions allow that space on how do I do this in my classroom? Not just knowing that there are 6 key principles, but really, how do we do this? So let's focus on peer support as we think about organizing a community around the child through Sam's story. This is Sam's story. Sam is a teenager who is suspected to have autism. He has passed all subjects and is above average in most of them. He has obvious strengths in organization and is very conscientious and hardworking. Sam struggles socially. He's usually alone and has issues making friends. Peers find him strange and prefer to stay away. Sam has been self-harming for several months. With the encouragement of his parents, Sam finally mustered courage to seek help for his self-harming behaviors. He was making good progress and kept to his regular sessions with the counselor, Ms. Tan. In class one day, his subject teacher casually complimented Sam for his courage and told the class she was proud that Sam sought help for his problems. Sam stopped seeking help after that. In organizing a community around the child, the positive classroom culture that we build should empower our students with a sense of safety and belonging. Could the teacher have encouraged Sam in another way? Would Sam trust the teacher, the counselor, the school in the future? What would a struggling student like Sam assume? He will probably feel like now the whole world knows about my issues. How could this situation be better managed? We all know that this community within our classrooms can make or break a student's success. It can be a huge facilitator and a massive barrier as well. In the words of an ST, make peer support practical. Make it happen, unpack it, facilitate it for our students, make it intentional. A community is about relationships. And for the student with SEN, this may not come naturally. STs also shared that what is most effective is when reaching out for help and helping others is normalized and not a secret endeavor or shameful experience. So as we thought deeper about so as we thought a little bit more about, how are we actually going to be doing this? Peer support was found to be very critical if a student is to succeed. So I mentioned it must be intentional, structured, and should empower students. Teachers must show the way, role model, and unpack what being a peer looks like, feels like, and sounds like. Students must be caught doing right and trust that the teacher has their welfare at heart. This trust is gained through positive experiences that assure the student that we have their interests at heart. In the case of Sam, that trust was broken. So how can I facilitate organizing a community? Circle time is something many of you facilitate, which can be further enhanced by ensuring it is structured. And this structure is clear to all students, including those with SEN. So being very intentional is core to ensuring that such opportunities are optimized. Pairing for discussions, grouping for collaborative learning must be deliberately engineered at the beginning. So certain students are not left without a partner or a group. Norms must be clearly communicated and not left to chance or common sense. Students must be taught how to look out for strengths and symbiotic relationships where they will soon realize that they gain as much as they give. The student with SEN is not needy and pitiful. Peers must learn that students with SEN can contribute. This feeds into society, and we must be mindful to role model what society should be like right from the start. And lastly, expectations. Clarity in sharing our expectations is core for effective teaching and learning to take place. So the student is provided a very predictable learning environment where clear expectations add to the positive classroom culture. Just going to share a last story, and this is Jake's story. Jake is a young teenager who's unable to stay on task for more than 10 minutes in most lessons. He has difficulties taking turns and working with peers and has about 3 outbursts each week. He's disengaged in most lessons and is seen either speaking out of turn, doing other homework, asking to go to the toilet, or looking out of the window. He enjoys mathematics. When Jake was engaged in a conversation, he shared that the lessons were boring, and anyway, he finishes his homework. He shared that he does not know what teachers want of him, other than to hand in work, which he does. What helps for a student like Jake is when teachers help make sense of expectations, boundaries, consequences. Teachers who did not assume that every student knows what's on their mind intentionally and purposefully co-created structures with their students. And these structures act as handles of support. So when space was created to discuss these structures, routines, boundaries, consequences among subject teachers, it was even more effective because there was consistency and students were better adjusted and behave. So there's no second guessing. Individual teachers also made it a point to ensure that they consistently use these strategies daily so that they become learned behaviors and a normal practice of the class and not an afterthought. So in Jake's case, once expectations and routines were clear and consistently practiced with appropriate consequence exercised, whenever there was a deviation, he was better supported. So I'm just going to go to the next slide very quickly. And this is an example which you can find from the SEN resource portal, a simple practice that we have like filing. But how many of us actually make filing clear, explicit, and share what our expectations are? So instead of getting so flustered about filing, right, and how the files come back to us so messy and that spoils our mood, be intentional. Make sure your expectations are clear. Demonstrate this. And for older kids who may feel so uncool to be using a file, include it in your instruction, include it in the way you teach, and have it as a class-wide approach so that they have these guides which are very, very useful for children with deficits in organization. Now, I'm just going to spend another 30 seconds to just take you through, point you to some resources. So to end off, I would like to direct you to resources that are available to support you as you support your students. I often get asked what would be the best starting point for a journey of learning in SEN. My recommendation is the SEN resource portal on MOE's intranet. The portal houses a huge resource base. So what I would do is just zoom in, if I don't have much time, to explore the resource tab. As you can see, that purple arrow, to think about and explore those links there. Opal 2.0 also houses the SEN's online PD modules as micro-learning units for SEN to support professional development. These are there to support you. I mentioned positive classroom culture. Do have a deeper dive through the MLUs on positive classroom culture, where we feature another student, Aaron, in Mr. Hakim's class. For peer support, we have 2 MLUs and a wiki page to provide you with necessary support. If you would like to look deeper into this, do join our wiki for updated resources. So if I were to map space with positive classroom culture, you would see how many ideas shared today will help you create an inclusive classroom for all. I really do hope that you will make space to think about space. And with that, I thank you for the honor of sharing my thoughts with you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kaur. I think your talk is very insightful. It's packed with experience and anecdotes. We really learned a lot from you. At this moment, I think it is good for us to take a short 5-minute break before our last keynote. Please do take note of the time during the break to submit your questions for the panel discussion later by scanning the QR code which will be shown. So let's go for the break now and see you back later in 5 minutes.